Temos aqui o prazer de ter a presença do Charles Lim, da Google. Ele é responsável pela parte de jogos mobiles pela Google. Thank you, Charles, for your talks. Hope you have a nice talk.
Thanks. My name is Charles Yim, and I manage mobile games and apps partnerships for the ads business at Google. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And I'm here to talk a little bit on how to build a viable business model with mobile advertising as a component of that if you're a game developer. I've been working in and around the games industry for about 5 or 6 years now. I worked at a startup called AdMob, which was acquired by Google last year. And AdMob was a mobile advertising startup where we helped some of the pioneering early mobile game developers in the space generate revenue by serving ads, one of the larger examples being Angry Birds. Prior to AdMob, I also worked in the Facebook ecosystem. I helped build a payment platform called Payment Wall, where we enabled game players around the world to purchase virtual currencies through a variety of different methods. And before that, I was a venture investor investing in games companies like Acclaim Games or Quick Hit Sports and social networks like Facebook. So it's great to be here today in Rio de Janeiro. And just out of curiosity, how many people in the room are game developers? Can you raise your hand? It's a healthy turnout. And how many of you are mobile game developers? Okay. And how many of you have shipped at least one title on mobile, whether it's Java, Brew, iOS, or Android OS? Okay, not so many of you. Okay. How many have shipped more than one? Okay, so hopefully this will be a helpful discussion, and hopefully we can get to Q&A at the end of the session. But moving on. So mobile is a really big deal. You don't need for me to tell you this, but it is the fastest growing consumer technology wave of the last generation. Currently, this number is probably even a little outdated. We're probably seeing about 1 million smartphone device activations globally every day at this point. About half of which are Android, about half of which are iOS, and then other platforms as well. So mobile is huge. I think I was certainly surprised whenever I leave the United States or Western Europe. A couple of years ago, it was really difficult to see folks with iPhones or Android phones or other smartphones. But as I travel to Brazil or Latin America or to China and India now, we find that people are on their phones just as much there on smartphones as anywhere else in the world. This is a pretty common sight. Whether you're waiting in the subway in New York or whether you're sitting around for your next flight at Santos Dumont, people are on their phones and their tablet devices. But it's always helpful to have some numbers to have context as to what that means. And one of which is if you look at how much people play just this one game, Angry Birds. They play 200 million minutes of this game is played every day worldwide. It's 380 human years of Angry Birds, of birds killing pigs, are played every day worldwide. And so, that's a fairly big deal. And it's a fairly big deal because I think on mobile, and the reason why you're here today is that games and entertainment are really the primary use case on smartphones that we're finding. More people spend more time playing games and being entertained on mobile than any other use case. Certainly more than using their phones to make calls. And another interesting data point is that if we look at that entertainment piece and we look at mobile YouTube, there are over 400 million video views just on mobile YouTube daily, worldwide. And that's pretty powerful because YouTube on desktop is the world's largest video site, video destination. And then the second largest video site or destination in the world is mobile YouTube. So mobile YouTube, just on devices, is larger than Vimeo, Hulu, basically every other site on the desktop internet where you can watch videos. So mobile is a very, very big deal. We believe that Brazil is an extremely important market for the internet and for online, so we've been investing time and energy to learn more about the Brazilian market. And last month, we ran a survey on the AdMob network of Brazilian smartphone users to see how important their mobile usage is. And we find that almost a third of Brazilian users spend more time on their phones than they do with any other form of media. 36% of them spend more time with their phone than on books, 31% more on televisions or spend more time looking at their phones than watching television. The really interesting part is that almost a third of Brazilians who have smartphones use it more than they do traditional desktop internet. And certainly, a similar number for using their phone versus radio. And this chart is to look at kind of the size and scale of mobile's growth over the last couple of years. This chart is looking at 2 years of our global network data at AdMob, and the red line represents the number of ad requests that are generated globally in our network, and the blue line being revenue. And you can see that from the red line, certainly that requests are growing at an exponential rate. So all over the world, people are really getting on mobile and getting on smartphone much faster than they are on other platforms. And in the emerging economies, what we're really seeing is that mobile is a leapfrog device. I think as you look at markets like Brazil and you look at consumers in what you call your Class B, Class C, Class D, particularly with C and D, they are much more likely at this point to have their first internet and online experiences on a smartphone than on a desktop computer or a laptop computer they actually own. And here's some more Brazil-specific data. When we look at the number of ad requests we've gotten from Brazil, that number has grown an order of magnitude in just 1 year. So in August of 2010, we got about 133 million ad requests from Brazil. And in August of this year, that was over 1.1 billion, representing over 727% growth. So mobile is big. Certainly, we're seeing the numbers, and we're seeing that there is just exponential growth happening. And as you can see, for what we found is a lot of that growth started happening in June of this year, and that's related to your domestic carriers changing their pricing policies on data. And so as a lot of carriers start changing their pricing policy on data so that it becomes more affordable and more accessible, we see massive growth at those points. So mobile is big. So where's mobile growing? There's the traditional non-smartphone device market, which uses wireless access protocol to browse the internet in a non-full-featured browser. It's still growing. It's still a healthy part of the mobile internet business and certainly mobile advertising business that we see here in Brazil. But where a lot of the growth is coming is iPhone and Android. And really, it's about that access to data. And as you can see that in June, as some of those market functions changed here in Brazil, we just saw an explosion of ad requests and kind of, as a proxy, information consumption on the internet via mobile here in Brazil. But that's not the only part of the story. We're personally very excited about tablet. Really, tablet was nascent until that point, and as you can see, sorry about that. Only in the last couple of months, we've really seen an explosion of kind of iPad and Android tablet usage in Brazil. So that being said, what does that mean for the game developers in this room? As we look at kind of the traditional game development market, I'd be curious as to how many game developers here built for other platforms like consoles or for online direct-to-consumer before thinking about building for Facebook or mobile. Can you raise your hands? All right, very few of you, a couple of you. But for those of you who did build for console and for other platforms, legacy platforms, you'll remember that the act of acquiring a user and monetizing that user used to be the same thing. So if you wrote a game and you printed it and published it on a CD-ROM or some sort of DVD disc and you put it in a store, when a user purchased that disc, that was the same act of acquiring a user and monetizing that user. Well, the business of games has really been disrupted and has changed a lot fundamentally in the last 5 years because those two things are not the same thing anymore. Certainly on Facebook and on mobile, you're seeing that users can discover, download, play games for free, and users can be acquired, and they may never monetize, or they may never actually spend any money and generate revenue for the original game developers. So, in kind of the past generations of game development, it was a lot simpler for game developers. They had publishing models where they would write a game, they would sell it in a store, and if somebody wanted to play it, they'd pay for it. And as all of you know, that is no longer true. So kind of in the new world with social and mobile games, there are these three things that you really need to worry about. One is acquiring users, which is you do through both organic and promoted ways. The second is monetizing your users, figuring out different ways to either to get them to pay you or to monetize them otherwise. And then certainly the measurement and analytics, which the previous speaker, Mario, went into in a lot of depth. So let's look at that first section, promote. User acquisition is an interesting thing. Back in 2008, when this all really started, was in 2008, in the summer of 2008, when Apple released the App Store for the first time. So, the smartphone gaming era is really only 3 years old, and even though it's not that old, it's only 3 years old, the dynamics of that market have changed incredibly. In 2008, there were probably somewhere between 4 and 10 million iPhones in the world. There wasn't even a commercially viable Android device in the market. So there weren't that many users out there, and there weren't that many apps. There are maybe a couple thousand apps at most in the summer of 2008. So if you were an early game developer or an app developer, and you put an app in market, it was really easy to get users because you had a small, very focused number of smartphone users who were early adopters. They were the type of people that have to have the newest gadget as soon as they come out, and they like to consume apps. I remember when I got my first iPhone, I was very eager to download as many different apps as possible and try them out. So, in 08, simply building an app and being an early developer, you had an advantage. You would just put it in the store and it would get visible. Well, fast forward 3 years, the story's a little bit different. We now live in a world where there are 500,000 apps in the Apple App Store, iTunes Store, and there are probably about 350,000 in Android now. And, but the market is bigger too. I mean, there are about 300 million smartphones in the world now. But if you're one of 500,000 games in the store, games or apps in the store, how do you get noticed? How do users find you? So it's a good question. And again, we ran some survey data in Brazil to see how Brazilian smartphone owners learned about the games and apps that they downloaded. A lot of it was organic and was based on buzz. If you look at these figures, the largest or the primary way people found their games and apps was doing a search in the marketplace. So they had a specific keyword or a name or a term that they were searching for in the marketplace. And what motivated those things were primarily friend recommended it. So a friend told you, hey, there's this game called Angry Birds or this game called Ant Smasher or Cut the Rope. So you should go look for it, and they would type those terms into the market in the search function. Same as if they had read about it somewhere. Some people also browse the stores. That was the fourth most common or third most common way. But beyond all those things, if you're not able to get a lot of viral word of mouth, or if you're not able to get somebody to write about you, how do you get your game and your brand in front of folks? You can advertise it. And we find that like a healthy portion of the games and apps which are consumed in Brazil were discovered through advertising. So how do you get discovered? I think that first point, building a brand, is really important. If we go back to that previous slide with all the app icons, you really only have a first impression and one chance to get a user to think about whether they want to download you or not. And I've been working with mobile game developers since the very beginning, and there are countless stories that I've talked to game developers about where they would take the same game and launch it and with one icon, and didn't quite work out. They'd get a couple thousand downloads, but never went anywhere. then they'd go work on the game and iterate on it, and they would change the icon to something cute or something that really stood out and see dramatically different results. But your app description and your icon matter. With the app description, when people are looking on their device and they have a small screen and they're trying to read about what your game's about, you want to keep it simple. You don't want them to read, paragraphs and paragraphs. I think having a couple of really good, succinct sentences helps. And then the second point, leveraging your social circles. I think most of the folks in this room are pretty savvy about how powerful social media marketing is at this point. Word of mouth is still probably the best way to promote your app. So as a developer, you should really leverage your social media as much as possible. And then there's the third part, which is once you exhaust those levers which are available to you, you can advertise your app. You can go to any number of places, ad networks like AdMob and Google or other peers, and invest some marketing dollars to try to promote your app. So let's look at that third part. That's what we're experts at, and we kind of want to walk you through the mechanics of how those things work. The typical app or game in mobile will have a user acquisition curve which looks like this. You build a game, you build an app, you put it out there, you acquire a number of users over time, and then you have a decay curve. Well, what you can really do is jumpstart or kind of put some steroids into this process by marketing. What it does is, if you invest marketing resources into your initial launch, you can pull some of that demand curve forward and hopefully get a halo effect. The two major app stores, the Apple iTunes Store and the Android Market, one component of the algorithm for ranking is the volume of downloads which occurs in a recent period. So there's a halo effect where if you're able to get more downloads quickly in a short period of time, that increases your rankings. And as your rankings increase, it's more visible to people in the stores, so more people also organically download it. So I think this mechanic is pretty well understood by savvy game developers now. A lot of the major mobile game developers that most of you will be familiar with, like Zynga or Pocket Gems or Stormate, they periodically invest in marketing to pull this demand curve forward and increase their initial user uplift. So how does that work? If you haven't done this before, it's a fairly simple process. You go and you create an ad unit and an ad campaign in a network like ours. And what it does is it creates an ad which can be run in other applications. When that ad is served, user can click on it. It will take them to the link in the App Store where they can read about your app and then decide whether they want to download it or not. Going back to that point about the icon and the description being very important, if you look at those screens, that's it. The only thing that we can do is give users a chance to evaluate your app. Our job is to help market your app, get it in front of more people, and give it more shots on goal to be downloaded for people to try it out. But those elements of doing your job of having appealing marketing, good descriptions are still critically important. And so how does this work? This is an example of a campaign that we ran for for an app in the Brazilian market earlier this year. It was a radio app called Radio Skull. And this shows a 5-day period of what Radio Skull's downloads looked like in the App Store in the 3 days prior to running an ad campaign and during a 2-day ad campaign. And what you'll see is, the axes are its relative ranking in the App Store and then also the number of downloads. In the 3 days prior to running an ad campaign, Radio Skull was kind of ranked between 90 and 100. So they were visible, but at the bottom of the App Store, and they were getting a couple dozen downloads a day. Once they ran their ad campaign, some of those mechanics that I was discussing, really proved true, and they were able to eventually break the top 10 in the Brazilian App Store. And in that period, they went from getting a couple dozen to thousands of downloads a day. And it progressively increased over time because as their rankings increased, they also got more organic downloads that weren't necessarily driven by the ad banners that you saw. But I think that the next way that we can really help game developers out is with our house ads. And before I should go into this, I should take a moment to talk about the fact that, software and tools providers like Google, there are a lot of things that we can do to help game developers, but at the end of the day, there's nothing that we can do to actually make your game better. And I always stress this in conversations with game developers. You know your product better than we do, and I'm hoping that you know your audience far better than we will. And so we provide folks with different tools to acquire users and to monetize their users. But at the end of the day, those things don't matter if you don't build a really good game. But the great thing is, if you build a really good game, our tools can be extremely powerful in helping you create a virtuous cycle. And I think one of the great examples of that is with our house ads product. So with house ads, if you're a game developer with a portfolio of multiple games and you continue to increase your portfolio of games, once you've built that first game that has really gotten traction in the market and found users, what we're best positioned to do is to help you take that initial success and expand it. And with our house ads product, basically, once you have a game that's popular and has a user base, you can use our ad serving infrastructure to start promoting your second game, your third game, your fourth game to your existing audience. And that's extremely powerful. So kind of going back to that engagement curve, what we're able to do is start smoothing out how the proliferation works. This is kind of the adoption curve if you sequentially release separate games and they have to increase organically on their own. But after app A, if you promote app B within your first app, you see the demand curve look like that. And what you see is, if you see the top of those two lines, it starts smoothing out. And if you keep doing this, what you'll find is this is where you're able to grow and maintain a more consistent audience across your entire portfolio of applications. Sorry about that. So kind of moving on to the second part, having looked at user acquisition. Say you acquire a user. Well, that's great. Now, how do you make money off of them? If we look at the social and mobile games business, there are really kind of 4 ways of generating revenue. They fall into kind of the direct and indirect bucket. I would say that, the fact remains that direct methods of monetization will always be the most profitable, and I encourage game developers to pursue those as much as possible. Those direct methods would be, paid downloads. If you have a game that you want to sell on mobile for 99 cents or $1.99, if somebody's willing to pay you that, you should absolutely sell as many of those as you can. The second one is the freemium model, where you have in-app purchases. And so that's something that Mario discussed at length in the previous lecture. But kind of moving on from those direct models, having an indirect model can also be very powerful, and certainly the one that we're experts at is advertising. So I'll go into that in a little bit more depth. The reason why that can be powerful is if you look at markets, like Brazil and certainly all markets around the world, there are different levels of user willingness to pay, or even user ability to pay. In the United States, we have a lot of great payments infrastructure, so I think there are more opportunities for folks to buy things directly within the game, but I know in a lot of markets that infrastructure is not fully developed yet. So you might have users in those markets, but they can't pay you even if they want to. How do you help them patronize your game? And indirect methods are great. And in Brazil, based on that same survey data, we found that 65% of smartphone owners only download free apps. They're not willing to pay for a game. So if you're a Brazilian developer and your core audience also happens to be a domestic audience, then that's basically 2/3 of the market which is not willing to pay for a game. And you can either try to cater to the 1/3 that will pay, or think more broadly and adopt those indirect monetization methods. So earning money with mobile advertising. It's a fairly simple process. We have a middleware platform to serve ads, and we have a software developer kit which we make freely available to game developers to integrate into their mobile game. Once they do so, they have the ability to serve our ad units, primary example being the banner ad. And once your gamers look at the ads and if they choose to patronize them and click on them, that generates revenue. Question is, how much are game developers making in Brazil? Actually, one of our largest game publishing partners is a Brazilian company called Best Cool and Fun Apps. How many of you are familiar with Best Cool and Fun Apps? Raise your hands. Great. Guilherme Schwartzman, who's the founder of Best Cool and Fun Apps, he is really kind of one of the first breakout game developers we've seen out of Brazil, and it's been a real pleasure to work with him. We had a mobile developer night at our office in Sao Paulo on Monday night, and he was kind enough to come and kind of speak with a group of developers. But at the developer night, he shared that he is now generating a 7-figure amount of revenue serving our ads in US dollars. So it is possible to make lots and lots of money. There is a Brazilian mobile game developer who's making millions of dollars today serving our ads. And his company didn't exist in 2010. This is a company that was formed this year. And the reason why this works is that if you're able to build a popular game that gets to a lot of users, advertisers, they really want to engage your audience. I think advertisers, their purpose is to try to proliferate their brand and kind of build a connection with potential customers for their brand. And so, that's one of the reasons why mobile advertising is such a powerful medium. But, kind of speaking about it in an abstract sense may not do it justice. So I'd like to show you the video we have of what that ad is. And really, when we go back to some of the previous points about the level of engagement in mobile versus other mediums in Brazil, even this market alone, that ad campaign by Samsung, really, we just took a TV advertisement and we repackaged it for mobile. But not only were we able to show the same commercial that a user might have seen on TV, but as you see, it's a much more interactive and kind of engaging experience. We're able to help them go to a mobile website and read more about the product. We can help them engage that social media by going to a Facebook site, and perhaps they might like the page or a Twitter site and tweet about the product. So really, mobile advertising is a very, very engaging medium. But you probably have some questions about what the basic mechanics are. So looking at all those kind of cool things, the Samsung advertisement and these game developers that are having all this success, there's a basic math to it as well. So with Ad Math 101, it's a question of, let's say you're a game developer, you serve our ads, how do you get paid? One example is, say you make 120,000 ad requests to our system, and we're able to return an ad 100,000 of those 120,000 times, so 83% of the time. Based on those 100,000 impressions, there's a question of how many clicks are generated. So how many times do your gamers click on the ads once they see them? If we assume a 1.5% click-through rate, so 1,500 times it's clicked on from those 100,000 impressions, and we're able to get an average 10 cents per click, that leads to $150 of revenue based on those 120,000 ad requests. And so it's just a question of engagement. It's a media model like anything else. As a game developer, you start to think about the math of, well, how many users does my game have? How many downloads? Of those downloads, each time, how many times will that person open up my app and play my game? How long is each session? And how many ads can I show in those sessions? What levers do you have to grow revenue? So if we look at that impression count and kind of do some of that math, here's one example. Let's say you're able to serve 20 ad impressions per user over the life of their use of your app. And there are 5 page views per session, and you have the opportunity to serve 100 ads to each user of your game with our ads in it. Applying that $1.50 CPM from earlier, you're able to generate 15 cents of revenue per user. So, you know, if you're able to get 1 million downloads, multiply that by 15 cents, it's $150,000. If you're able to get 10 million users, you know, it's $1.5 million of revenue potentially per user. Also, if you could use our house ads to try to promote your users to a paid version of your game, we find that with social and mobile games, there's some percentage of your users that just love your game so much they will pay you, and certainly we saw that in the previous presentation. Typically, in my experience, it's somewhere between 2 to 10% of your users. But if you can get 5% of your users to go download a paid version of your game, that's an additional 10 cents of revenue per user. So the numbers start to become pretty compelling using the ad model. Measurement. I think you all got a very quantitative lecture about this earlier, but let's review it in brief. It's easier to measure downloads. You know, if you're a developer of Android games, we have a dashboard for you which allows you to track the number of downloads and kind of other fundamental data from the Android market. But we also have, you know, lots of interesting country and device and user level data, so you can start to really track, you know, what kind of handset owners are really players of my game, what countries are they coming from, and you can begin to think about, oh, what does my audience look like and how do I best serve them? Google Analytics is another really great tool that we have for developers, in that you can start tracking the actual behaviors, when, where, and how users are engaging them in the game. And you know, I think as game developers, you all have a vision of a narrative that you want to present to a game or an experience, but the picture you have in your mind and the reality in the market can sometimes differ. You know, I know that we've talked to game developers who might have 10 levels in their first game, and they really want that last level to be kind of a blowout experience, so they invest kind of 30% of all the time that they put into building that game in the last level. But they put the game in the market and they find, oh wait, 80% of your users never get past the second level. So you know, having those sorts of insights I think is really important, and so that how you know how to better fine-tune your game, have a more enjoyable experience, and also know how to allocate your time and resources. And Google Analytics is a great product for doing that. And then of course, it's really important to track where your user's coming from. There are all those different ways that you can acquire users, either through search, through word of mouth, through social media marketing like Facebook or Twitter, through advertising and promoting them on networks like ours. But you know, every game has a different story. What works for one game won't necessarily work for another game. And so it's important to keep track of what is working for you so you can focus on those things better. So, you know, with the analytics, it really helps you look at all those important things. You know, if you're finding that you have an iPhone version of your game and an Android version of your game, and with our analytics product, you're able to see that 80% of your users come from one versus the other, that can help you decide whether you want to focus on them or whether maybe there are deficiencies in the other version that you want to address. It can help you look at kind of your user base. Is it stable? Is it declining? Is it something that you need to be worried about and investing your time? Same with your business model. And even with features, right? As I said, you might think that something is really cool and invest a lot of time and energy in it, and it's just not what your user base cares about. So, getting started with AdMob and Google, the 3 things we spoke about: marketing your app, monetizing your app, and measuring those things. Are fairly easy and painless. You can go to our website, admob.com or google.com/mobile ads, and there's lots of info there. And certainly covered a lot of things. And one of the neat things that our marketing team has done this year is that they've created a website to walk you through each of those issues and to look at case studies of folks like Guilherme and see how they've approached building their business on mobile. And actually, it's a social site, so for those of you who find a lot of success doing this, we welcome you to share your stories here as well. Any questions? No questions, huh? Oh, in the back. There.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Luis. I'm from Ipanema Games. We have made some tests using Edmob as a try to publish ourselves. How much we should expect for the cost per install of our applications? I know each click costs about 5 cents, but a user clicks but don't install the application right away. We should our tests. We got 10 clicks for one install, so it's about 15 cents per install. But I don't know if the icon or this app descriptions could improve our click per install cost, so we can use this the mob as a publisher. I don't know what you can help me about this.
So I think you're asking questions about how to optimize your ad revenue and kind of managing click-through rates and those issues and both experience. I'll kind of speak about them generally because I couldn't quite hear the question clearly. But you know, with respect to best practices in the ads, I think you want to think about what's a logical place to embed them in your user experience. You know, products like ours are one size fits most, not one size fits all tools. So we build our software infrastructure to serve as many different types of apps and games as broadly as possible, not necessarily custom tailored for your individual game or your individual app experience. So as you think about that, I think it's important to even keep in mind in the initial game design, if you're going to serve ads, what's a logical place to do that? What's a place that's not intrusive to the ad or the app experience, and that the user might be receptive to the advertisement? Typically, that's a natural jumping off point. We find that serving an ad between gameplay levels, you know, for a session-based game, or at the end of a level is typically a really good place. You know, in a game like Angry Birds, your user has just gotten that 3rd star and finished their level, and they're feeling pretty good about themselves, and they have a second, you know, to enjoy their victory before the next level, and they might be able to look at an ad at that point. Also, you know, kind of a general comment about the advertising business is that it's a highly seasonal business. So this is a two-party equation. On your side of the equation, there are the publishers who will serve the ads, and on the other side of the equation are the advertisers, or the big companies who buy the ads. And advertising is a seasonal business. You know, we don't necessarily determine when it's important for them to spend more money in advertising or not in advertising. Traditionally, in most Western markets, advertising is tied to the major shopping seasons. So, you know, in the United States, Western Europe, et cetera, the 4th quarter of the year, November, December, is typically the most important time of the year for advertising. We find that about 30% of all ad revenues will be generated in the 6 weeks between the Thanksgiving holiday in the United States and the New Year's, going to the Christmas shopping season. So those are the important things to keep in mind as game developers. I think, you know, if you happen to be a really successful game developer and you have an ad-supported model, having visibility going into the end of the year is great, because you're going to make 30–40% of your revenues for the years from ads in November and December. Any other questions?
Yes. Hi. I have one question.
Sure.
Sometimes the game you're making presents you with opportunities to include the ads in the game itself, like you have a billboard somewhere, or you have some other spaces inside the game where you would think that the ad could fit nicely.
Sure.
So I would like to know how is your opinion regarding this customization of ads, and if this is possible, and how can you make this in a nice manner inside a game?
Sure. That goes back to my point from the previous question. You know, we built a technology to be used by as large a number of people as possible. So it's one size fits most, not one size fits all. If you were going to build some sort of sports game that had a spot for billboards in it, you may want to take into consideration the standard ad format sizes that we use, which are kind of Internet Advertising Bureau standardized ad unit sizes, because it would be difficult for a company like Google to build a business just on building a custom ad unit for your game, which doesn't work well for anyone else's game or anyone else's app. So I think if being able to serve ads, in a very customized format was important to you, that's something at the end of the day you would consider building on your own. But we want to be able to serve all of the game developers in the room, which is why we have very kind of well-known, very standardized ad format sizes. And I would encourage the game developers to take that into account before they design their game. Yep.
Hi.
Any other questions?
Yeah. My name is Andrew. I wonder about the metrics that you've shown. You suggested that you could use Google Analytics to track some measures. But I've used a lot of Google Analytics for web apps, and it's a great product. But how can I use that in games that are native?
You can embed our analytics inside IDs in the games via Java. I'm happy to talk about that more offline. Also, as a startup guy who's acquired by Google, I have a lot of affinity for a lot of startup products out there, and there are a lot of great mobile-focused pure play analytics products. I mean, one of your points being that Google Analytics is a much more general product. I think there are a lot of great mobile analytics platforms. There's one called Flurry. If any of you are kind of experienced mobile app developers, many of you will be familiar with it. But I encourage people to kind of assess all of their options. I think there are a lot of great analytics products out there.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my question is regarding in-game advertising. Sometimes ads can be a bit bothersome for whoever's playing the game.
Sure.
So what is your view, or do you have any information on how the market behaves regarding upgrading the application for a premium edition where you don't have inline advertisement?
Yeah, that actually goes back to my point about our house ads product, and also the fact that some percentage of the users of your game are hardcore users versus some percentage being casual users. We find that a lot of our game publishing partners will put out a light or free version of their game that has our ads, and they can use our house ads product to serve an ad that says, hey, if you want an ad-free experience, you can upgrade to 99 cents or a paid version of the application. We see that in a lot of really popular games, one of which is Words with Friends, which was originally published by New Toy but now owned by Zynga. That's a really common model. The free version of Words with Friends serves our ads, but they have a paid version which they use our ad technology to promote to their users. So it's kind of one of those things where it's chicken and the egg, but if you have someone that loves your free games but hates ads, you can serve them an ad to say, hey, you can pay for it and stop seeing ads.
Yeah, but do you know if the Brazilian market actually buys these upgrades, or it just ignores them and prefers
They
the free
do,
version?
and I think that just happens to be, follow the natural trend for users and their willingness to pay. I've worked in the social and the mobile games industry for the last 5 years, and it varies, but typically you'll find that between 2 and 10% of free and freemium game players will monetize directly. So if you build a game that has kind of a normal adoption pattern, you should see somewhere kind of between 2 and 10% of your users download a paid version. I think we have someone who has a question down here.
Well, my name is Manuel Tavares. I'm from the Natural Computing Laboratory from Mackenzie, and I would like to ask you, apart from the marketing aspects of game development and paid advertisement, what do you think is the most important aspect of a game and app from Apple Store and Android Marketplace to be discovered to generate this halo effect you spoke earlier?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that's one of the most common questions I get. Everybody kind of wants the silver bullet answer. And the fact of the matter is that I don't have one for you, right? If I did, I'd probably take that very closely guarded secret and sell it for billions of dollars. But it's really logic at the end of the day. I mean, if we kind of think about the things that we've reviewed in the presentation, it's a big market out there. I think users have a lot of choice, and kind of the common analogy that I use is air hockey. For those of you who have iPhone and Android phones, I would encourage you to go to the respective markets, just type in air hockey, and see how many table air hockey games there are out there. There are probably over 40 or 50 on both platforms, and there's a question of, does the world need 50 different versions of a mobile air hockey game? Well, I don't know. I mean, the developers seem to think so. They think they have an audience, and they think they have the solution for it. And I kind of view it as the same as bottled water. Water is pretty much the same everywhere you go. It's H2O. How many different types of bottled water are there in the world? Tons, right? And each one speaks to a different type of audience, and it's merchandised differently. There are games that are very standardized, the way that bottles of water are very standardized, like Perrier or Evian. Kind of everyone knows them the world over and trusts it. Same way everyone knows what Angry Birds is, and if Angry Birds puts out a new version of their game, they have a good sense of what it'll be, and they'll download and play it. There are bottles of water that come in very, very fancy bottles and cost 5 times probably what this cost, and they're marketed as a premium experience. And then there are games that are much more hardcore in their development, like an Infinity Blade, and really push the boundaries of the technology that are available in the device and try to deliver the most premium gameplay experience possible. I think I do have a point. I'm not dissembling. The point is to really understand what your values as a game developer are, and just catering to that and finding the right audience for it, because the audiences have changed. Going back to my earlier point about the fact that this was very easy 3 years ago in kind of a relative basis when the iPhone was new. There were only probably, like I said, 5 million maybe iPhones in 2008 when the App Store first came out, and there were only about 3,000 apps. So if you simply put an app out there, people would download it, because those first 5 million early adopters were people who are a lot like me. Most of those 5 million iPhones were in the United States. Most of them were either in New York or in the San Francisco metropolitan area. People who had bought them were early adopters, well-educated, high household income. So it was a certain demographic, right? And they were the folks who went to the store to buy a $1,000 iPhone and just consume as many apps as possible, because it was a very novel thing to do. But a year later, in 2009, that number in the global audience started to change, right? So kind of, if you go a year forward from that, those 5 to 10 million iPhones suddenly became 30 to 50 million iPhones globally. Probably still a lot of the same types of people, but instead of just being in San Francisco and New York, suddenly it was those people also in London and in Shanghai and in Tokyo and all those places. And the global audience started to change. Go forward another year to 2010, 150 million phones in the world. It wasn't just iPhone, it was also Android phones. Also, the socioeconomic composition of that audience changed. It wasn't just kind of very wealthy urban people. It started becoming a much more middle-class phenomenon across the developed world. And then move forward a year later, it's just truly global. I mean, you go to India, you go to China, you go to Russia, everybody has smartphones now, and it's not just really rich people either. So the games that worked 3 years ago, and the people who downloaded them are different from the people who potentially buy and consume games today. When you go to for these conferences and you see people like Mario or myself speak, we talk about what has worked. Another point that I would leave with folks here is that what's necessarily worked 3 years ago won't work today. You should really keep in mind who the audience you want to serve is, because now you have a large diversity and variety of folks that you can reach out there in the world.
Hi. Hello, Charles. I used to work in venture capital, and I'm seeing the costs are increasing a lot in advertising. For instance, in Facebook last year, you can see like cost per click, 20 cents, 15 cents per click. Now you see like $1, $2. And if you're trying to, for instance, if I have like a 10% of conversion to acquire, my CPA is going to be $20 for a cost per click for $2. How do you see this developing? Do you think this is going to increase in mobile as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. What you're really talking about is a market function. I have two comments with respect to that. Kind of the first one being about the venture-funded environment and people pursuing this opportunity. Mobile is really big right now. You've all read about all these mobile game studios that are getting funded by venture capital firms, both in the United States and even here in Brazil. You have kind of these emerging game studios that are raising kind of private capital from your local private investors. They all have one goal, and I'm sure you all have the same goal, which is to go get as many users as possible, and so it's a very competitive marketplace. The flip side holds true on just the ad monetization side. So, when I talk to a lot of developers about, generating revenue by serving ads and kind of the quality of their game, each and every one of you who decides to build a game and serve ads, whether it's ours or someone else's, you're actually competing against the other person sitting next to you to demonstrate to an advertiser that your game is the best place for an advertisement to run, that you have the most relevant audience or you have the largest audience, and that your game is the best destination. So it's a market function. I agree. It's very competitive, and that's because people are starting to really recognize that smartphones and mobile is the fastest growing and largest consumer technology trend of our generation. I think we have time for one more question. There. No more time? All right. Well, I guess sorry about that, but thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and enjoy the rest of the show.